We've all heard that carrots are good for our vision, which presumably stems from some peripheral understanding about the fact that vitamin A is integral to the photosynthesis pathway of converting light into electrical and chemical signals that the rest of the eye and brain can use. And yet I'm guessing that there probably aren't that many people walking around who are vitamin A deficient. They're probably out there, but not that many, especially in developed countries. And in addition, in the last really 5 years, but in particular in the last 2 years, I've seen a proliferation of supplements on the market to promote eye health and longevity of vision. I'd love your thought on this general theme of nutrition and supplements for improving eye health or for maintaining eye health. And before we started recording, you mentioned that ophthalmology, or at least eye health, is one area of medicine that has a bit, not extensive, but a bit of a longer history of exploring supplementation in rigorous randomized controlled trials, whereas other areas of neuroscience and neural health, such as Alzheimer's, et cetera, certainly there are brain health supplements out there, but there aren't a lot of rigorous data to support them just yet. So what are your thoughts on nutrition, aside from the standard thing of, people shouldn't be ingesting too many calories such that they are obese and diabetic and therefore, et cetera, indirect effects of nutrition. What are your thoughts on nutrition and supplementation for eye health?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, in ophthalmology, we actually do have quite a bit of studies. There's been quite a bit of attention over the years, even over the decades, looking at this question. And I think it's worth highlighting a couple of yeses and a couple of nos. For macular degeneration, which we talked about being an exceedingly common cause of vision loss, there have been 2 age-related eye disease studies called ARIDS, age-related eye disease studies, ARIDS. There was ARIDS and then ARIDS 2. And those studies were large, randomized trials of giving patients supplements. And in ARIDS, it was vitamin C and E, higher dose than would just come in a multivitamin, zinc and copper, and then also beta-carotene. And beta-carotene is one of these what are called carotenoids. If you look at the extended family, there's maybe 600 different chemical entities of these carotenoids. And beta-carotene is one of them that's in the direct pathway of making vitamin A. And so that was the principle in the ARID study. And the ARID study showed that patients randomized to these pills compared to controls, these are antioxidants in part, right? In addition to feeding into that vitamin A pathway. And the patients randomized to get that supplement mixture showed less progression of their dry macular degeneration in the moderate to severe ranges. If you had mild macular degeneration, they didn't show a statistically significant improvement. But I will say it's my experience, myself with patients and seeing how the field works. If you have mild macular degeneration, even though it's not as clinically proven, we're still often recommending, hey, if you can afford that supplement, go ahead and buy that. Now, ARIDS was then followed by a second study, ARIDS 2, also with vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, and copper. They actually tested whether a slightly lower dose of zinc would be as good as a higher dose, and a lower dose was as good as a higher dose. And then instead of the beta-carotene, they tested against the beta-carotene. They tried 2 other carotenoids that are called lutein and zeaxanthine. And they actually found head-to-head that the ARIDS 2 formula, without the beta-carotene and with the lutein and zeaxanthine, that formula was even better at slowing dry macular degeneration in the moderate to severe population. Again, it's not clear how much it may help mild macular degeneration, but in the sort of clinically defined moderate towards severe group, there was a statistically significant, it reduced it by about 20-25%, the progression of your dry macular degeneration. And, over a couple of years, 20-25%, you may not notice, but over a couple of decades, that could really slow down the progression of your disease. Now, it turns out that the beta-carotene, they noted a little bit of an increased cancer risk in the patients in the ARIDS 1 who had that beta-carotene, mostly in patients who are smokers. They also noticed in the second one that if you were already not taking a multivitamin or not eating a diet that's already naturally rich in lutein or zeaxanthine, that the effect of that supplement was even stronger. So it was very strong clinical trial support for taking what we now use, this ARIDS-2 supplementation. And I'm sure we can list the formula or put it in the links under your podcast, that this really does slow macular degeneration. So that's like a very strong example of a yes, you should do this. There's one yes brewing in the glaucoma field right now, and that's high-dose vitamin B3. B as in boy 3. It's also called in its various forms either nicotinic acid or nicotinamide. The nicotine sounds like nicotine, but this is not a substitute for smoking or vaping. This is a vitamin that just has a very similar sounding name.
It's in the NAD synthesis pathway, correct?
That's exactly right. It's in the NAD pathway. NAD is one of the oxidative stress regulators and energy regulators of our cells. So it's a very critical molecule in the metabolism of our cells. And there was very strong evidence in preclinical models of mice, given glaucoma, that manipulating this pathway and sort of increasing this pathway could be protective in glaucoma or other optic neuropathies, optic nerve degenerative diseases. And so there have now been 2 limited but randomized controlled clinical trials, one looking at glaucoma patients, looking at their visual field, so their actual visual performance, and the other looking at the electrical signals in the eye called an electroretinogram, kind of like an EEG does for your brain. We can do an ERG for your retina. And in both of those trials, high-dose vitamin B3 was A, found to be very safe, and B, was shown to actually improve, at least in the short term, improve retinal function measured either on visual field testing or on the electroretinogram. Now, this is now entering clinical trials, large kind of phase 3 style clinical trials, actually around the world. It's a very hot topic for glaucoma, the fact that this NAD boosting supplementation with high-dose vitamin B3 might be a great approach to helping protect the nerve in glaucoma. And so as I say, there's 3 or 4 large randomized phase 3 style clinical trials starting now. And so over the next year or 2, we'll get more data. But I'll tell you, I have patients, and if they're at the end of their rope and we are having a lot of trouble controlling their vision loss from glaucoma, I'm already recommending in these limited cases, hey, why don't you try this? It's almost certainly safe, and it may help protect your vision over time. So that's an area that's kind of another could be a yes. Early data is pointing in the right direction. You want to be careful. But I am starting to recommend it at the same time that we're actually doing the clinical trials. Now, that said, there are a lot of other things that people talk about, other supplements, ginkgo biloba, things with generic names on the internet, like, glaucoma preservation.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
That sort of thing gives me hives,
Yeah. And these are areas where there might be scientific premise, like a plausible explanation for how this should help, but not good data that it actually helps. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, in most cases, these things are safe, but I just worry about patients hitching their wagon to something that's not going to help them, getting their hopes up. Worst case scenario, not taking their actually proven prescribed treatments and instead using an alternative therapy that doesn't have data to support it. And so I think there's a lot of, either unfounded, unsupported, information. It travels around chat rooms, travels around the internet. One person tells the next person, there's inappropriate advertising for some of these. And I really don't want patients to be hurt, not necessarily hurt by taking something that's not helping, but maybe hurt by feeling like, I don't have to go to the doctor, I'm taking this supplement. And that would be obviously a really bad potential outcome for a patient.
Yeah.